To the southeast of the Iberian Peninsula, in the region of Murcia, lies the town of Cabo de Palos. Above Cabo de Palos, a lighthouse rises, a grey tower of some 81 meters high, from where one can make out the Hormigas Islands. The fishing heritage of Cabo de Palos goes back to its first inhabitants. Today, the fishermen of the area still fish using traditional techniques with trammel nets and long lines. From the early hours of the morning, they start their artisanal work, non-industrial fishing that maintains the essence of the relationship between man and the sea. The fishing takes place close to home, in the same waters where their fathers and their fathers' fathers once fished. Today, these waters form one of the largest reserves in the Mediterranean, characterized by its rocky beds with vertical walls and large blocks at different depths, home to a great biodiversity. It is a thoroughfare and a resting place for preys and predators that, guided by the currents, find shelter and food in these reefs. The coral banks and the large extensions of red gorgonia are clear evidence of the wealth of this reserve. Here, serranids such as the grouper find their ideal environment, as do cave species such as lobsters and cephalopods like octopus, for which the interest in this area is limited to finding an adequate space for protection. The beds of oceanic Posidonia are a clear sign of the exceptional quality of these waters. The aim of the Marine Reserve is to protect, regenerate and develop the fishing resources in order to maintain sustainable fisheries that might allow artisanal fishermen to preserve a traditional way of life passed on from generation to generation. Spain, bathed by the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea and situated in the south of Europe, is a predominantly Mediterranean country because of its location, orientation and organization, as well as its cultural setting. However, the peninsula is also influenced by the Atlantic, thanks to the western winds that arrive from the ocean and the oceanic currents that reach the coasts of southern Spain, providing them with a constant stream of nutrients. Some 70 million years ago, an important geological event took place, the Alpine orogeny. The African plate started to move northwards, exerting enormous pressure along thousands of kilometers between the Iberian Peninsula and India, pushing, deforming and lifting anything it found in its way. In the south of the peninsula, the materials of what until then had been a seabed were lifted, leading to, among other things, the formation of a great mountain range, the Betic Mountains, stretching along the southeast of the Iberian Peninsula from Cadiz to the Balearic Islands. Just as on land, there are winds. The sea has currents, sea winds capable of traveling thousands of kilometers along routes which hide an immense wealth of life. Along the way, the Strait of Gibraltar provides the Atlantic currents with the only point of exchange of waters, allowing a constant flow of nutrients to reach the rather depleted Mare Nostrum. These surface currents, conditioned by the depth of the strait, tend to compensate for the evaporation of the Mediterranean waters, and their thermal characteristics make the Mediterranean a warm water basin. The Cabo de Palos Hormigas Islands Marine Reserve is located at one end of the Betic Mountains, in the region of Murcia, where this mountain range runs into the water, forming a series of elevations, all below the surface, except one island, Hormiga, and one islet, Hormigón. The Romans called this fishing village Palus, in a clear reference to the Mar Menor, giving rise to the name Cabo de Palos. This set of submarine walls and mountains are what give character to this area of the Spanish Mediterranean, besides its location. It is an oceanic area of transition between the Atlantic waters that come into the Alboran Sea and the typically Mediterranean waters of eastern Spain, attracting the presence of species adapted to the Mediterranean waters, as well as species more typical of the Atlantic. The high degree of hydrodynamism attracts the presence of species able to withstand not only the currents, but also the strong tides characteristic of the area. Thalassoma, rainbow wrasses, algae varieties, damselfish and sea stars are part of this fauna. The small particles eroded and transported by the waters provide a continuous source of food, favoring a high degree of biodiversity and large populations of individuals. But these submerged rivers do not only provide nutrients for small predators, and it takes this striped grouper no time to detect the presence of schools of minute bogues that, on their way to shallower waters, find refuge, food and protection in the elevations and islets. Such a quantity of individuals will hardly go unnoticed for their usual predators. They will not take long to appear. No sooner do the first bogues detect the presence of the amberjacks than a movement of troops will take place, changing direction and trying to reach the rear guard of the predator's school, a move that will not escape the predator's notice. The strategy of the bogues consists in trying to camouflage themselves as a group. If one fish moves, they all move at the same time. For such a quick predator, the solution will be to launch a powerful attack, seeking chaos and disorder. Its aim is to divide the school into smaller, more isolated groups. But this is no easy task. For the barracudas, the elevated seabed is an ideal place to find food. Traveling through the underwater slopes in large groups, a sight difficult to catch in other areas. These slopes are also characterized by the presence of large blocks of rock, home to a wide variety of fish species. In these dark areas, it is easy to find croakers, groupers and eels, such as this Mediterranean moray eel, who is receiving the attentions of small deparasiting crustaceans, and who usually share the same habitat as occurs with conger eels. For serranids, this is a privileged environment. A bed of coral resulting from the quality of these waters. Each shady nook is home to colonies of anemones and algae, where it is easy to find cardinal fish. The sharp slopes account for the presence of overhangs, dark spaces open to the influence of the currents. Ideal spaces for the colonies of anemones to show us all their splendor. The high degree of biodiversity in these spaces explains the frequent presence of different species of nudibranchs, such as this Platydorus argo. But for the small blenny, this intruder is a mere nuisance, with a weak point. Its delicate branchiae. A continuous attack there soon yields the desired effect, and the Platydorus argo soon vacates the area. Moving further into the depths of the vertical wall, other species of great interest remain hidden. Where the light is dim, their mimetism is almost perfect, giving themselves away only when they move or expose their bright colors to the light. Here, the forests of bright red gorgonias are a clear indication of the warmth of these waters. The strip they occupy is incredibly rich, hard to find in other Mediterranean areas. The sheer number and the incredible variety of species that form a veritable tapestry on the walls make one of the most valuable assets of this marine reserve. with their bright colors representing a perfect disguise for the scorpion fish. A perfect place to observe without being observed. The colonies of polyps facing the current can remain closed or open, capturing nutrient particles that flow through these waters, with each space representing for the observer a minute forest, not of plants, but of animals. Close to the base of the submerged mountain range, where the hydrodynamism is moderate and the light barely comes through, we are still accompanied by sparrows, but now smaller in size. This underwater world is still home to an astounding fishing wealth, where the young and adult dentex fish find their natural habitat, but where the large groupers are the real protagonists. For the grouper, besides man, there are practically no predators, and we can see this from the confidence of their movements. The quality of the waters and abundance of food are decisive factors in the choice of their territory. If the area is adequate and the conditions favorable, this species will take no time to form a populous group, where one dominant male will mark the behavior of the rest of the individuals. For the lobsters, the reserve is an ideal habitat. We find fine specimens and numerous groups not only in the protected perimeter, but also in the surrounding areas, a spectacle unfortunately now almost forgotten in other areas of the region. The border between the granitic sand bottoms and the vertical wall hides grottos and caves covered with small crustaceans, where it is easy to find scorpion fish. This space serves as a refuge for a nocturnal animal that, from the inside of its cave, observes the light that penetrates through the entrance. Unlike what occurs with lobsters, these individuals, some of them impressive in size, reject the presence of other individuals. Their habitat extends to areas of Posidonia and rock, although here their size is smaller. At these depths and a few meters from the great rocky formations, the different species still maintain a common factor, their size. The presence of large octopus is widespread throughout the reserve, especially during the breeding months when the females prepare their dens, ideal spaces to deposit their eggs. For the octopus, ignorant of the tragedies that have made Cabo de Palos an important archaeological site since Phoenician times, these wreckage remains, far from serving their original purpose, are merely spaces where they can find refuge and protection. A great number of sinkings and the tragic loss of lives have accompanied traditional fishing activities in this region for many years. It has very often been the fishermen themselves and their families who, sacrificing their lives, have saved hundreds of people and even prevented a sinking from turning into a new tragedy. In spite of the considerable wealth of its waters, the strong currents pose many problems for the fishermen working in the reserve and surrounding areas, which in order to be surmounted require all their skills. Here, the nets are exposed to the variations in intensity and direction of the currents, sometimes causing them to literally turn upside down, in spite of the buoyed ropes, which can offer little resistance. Once the rig hits bottom and settles, it is easy for it to get stuck. Another of the assets of the reserve and its surroundings, both to the north and to the south, is the prairie of Posidonia. For the fauna, These large extensions of sea plants represent a uniform bed spotted with rocky formations where to find refuge, food, and protection. Posidonia is not an alga. It is a phanerogamous plant with a stalk, leaves, and rhizome, flowers, and fruit. During the sexual reproduction period, the oceanic Posidonia grows bunches of green flowers in 3 to 10 flower groupings. The insemination yields a small fruit known as sea olive. The stalk of the Posidonia is short and covered with hardened remains of old leaves. Posidonia can reproduce asexually through lateral shoots that grow from the rhizome or root with a horizontal and vertical growth. The Posidonia prairies form the most important climax ecosystem in the Mediterranean, equivalent to minute forests of the land ecosystem. Several characteristic species, such as the fan mussel and others of great interest for fisheries, find their ideal space to settle in or simply to reproduce. The Posidonia prairies structure the seabed, coming to form barrier reefs that maintain the sedimentary balance with the coastline. It is the habitat of over 400 species of plants and 1,000 species of animal, many of them of great interest for the fisheries, such as the cuttlefish that, if necessary, adapts to its environment by mimicking the Posidonia leaves with its tentacles. But if that's not enough, they can always resort to fleeing. Its proximity to rocky areas provides different species, such as the octopus, with a place to find food. This ecosystem is a hunting area for several pelagic predators that we find patrolling these waters. Close to a small rocky formation, the sargo witnesses the arrival of the bogues that have traveled through the more abrupt areas of the reserve before reaching these more shallow waters in search of shelter. But for them, this sargo poses no threat, and they have no trouble rejecting it in spite of the difference in size. This species, however, does represent a serious danger for the minute bogues because of its constancy, speed, and group strategy. Acting as one single individual, this disciplined army will employ its usual strategy to group and descend. For the young amberjacks, this is a familiar strategy, and it is not long before they launch their attack. To try to go unnoticed among the crowd without a safe place in which to shelter is not a good strategy. But this seabed can serve as the best of shelters. The secret is to burrow in among the leaves and position themselves at the rear guard of the school of amberjacks, allowing them to go past above them. Again and again, the same strategy is performed, always with the same result. In the struggle for survival, any effort must be rewarded. Otherwise, it is better to leave the area and search for other possible preys. To preserve this wealth and maintain the fishing tradition both in interior and exterior waters requires a joint management effort by the autonomous community and the state authorities. This surface area of 1,898 hectares stretches from Cabo de Palos northeastwards. In the Marine Reserve, professional artisanal fishing with trammel and longline is allowed in an effort to guarantee its continuity. Duly authorized deep-sea diving, regulated according to the total number of allowed submersions within a given time span, is also allowed. There is also an area of maximum protection, or integral reserve, spanning a radius of half a mile from the lighthouse of Hormiga Island, where the only activities allowed are of a scientific nature, aimed at guaranteeing a free habitat, protecting it from any possible impact. The reserve covers part of the Cape, the Bajo de Testa, the Piles de Dentro and Bajo de Fuera reefs, and the surroundings of Hormiga Island that make up the integral reserve area, constituted by the Bajo de Mosquito reef and the islets of Hormiga, el Hormigón and la Losa. Just a few hours from dawn, small fishing boats are gathered in the netting area. There is no room for a large crew on these boats, but they are sailed by fishermen with considerable experience. The nets are positioned and let down in an organized effort, requiring maximum skill and attention. Once the rig has been dropped and marked, it is time to be patient and wait for their efforts to be rewarded. At the first signs of dawn, the long-line fishing boats reach the netting area, and the long and patient work of gathering the nets begins. The long-line rig is a bottom rig with a main line from which other, thinner lines, the branch lines, stem, ending in hooks and separated from one another by a specific distance, depending on the species fished, in order to prevent tangling. The targets of long-line fishing are rockfish such as groupers, pollacks, conger eels. They are not always lucky, and this time the hooks have come up empty. Still, the skipper does not lose hope that in the next line their efforts will be rewarded. This time, they seem to have been luckier. The catches are not many in number, but they are large in size.
El congiro este que pesa 20 kilos. Ahí abajo hay otro, un pescado. Otro congiro.
It seems that the catches of the day are over. Now it is time to prepare the rig for a new day, in the hope that tomorrow the sea is more generous. It is time to start lifting the rig. Trammel fishing is geared to capturing red mullets, cuttlefish, octopus, different types of scorpionidae such as the spotted scorpionfish, very much appreciated in the region, being the main ingredient of the typical regional dish. As the rig is lifted and the first live catches appear, they are carefully untangled one by one, with great care not to damage each piece. This task has a curious and cheeky spectator. A gannet, aware that here it can find easy food. Once the nets have been gathered, the boat makes its way to the port to unload its catch and sell it on the fish market. The fish is carefully taken from the net and prepared for its sale upon arrival at the port. The first boats arrive at the fish market of San Pedro de Pinatar, where the sung auction is performed by criers faithful to the tradition. The catches are put in boxes and prepared for their sale. They are taken to the fish market, where the fish is sold as soon as it is unloaded. The sale is carried out by reverse auction. Once the boxes are inside the fish market, the auction officer raises the price a little. Then the auctioneer takes over, and the price starts running in decreasing order at great speed. When satisfied with the price, the buyer bids, and the auction is concluded.
Mío.
In other larger fish markets, such as that of Cartagena, the auction, sung by criers, is replaced by modern electronic methods. The process is practically the same, although in this case, man has been replaced by machines. A screen shows the starting price, its variation during the auction, and the weight in kilos of the type of fish under auction for all those who wish to partake. With the aid of an electronic remote control, registered buyers could stop the auction price and withdraw the amount of fish they wish to buy. There is an information and maintenance center, where information about the reserve is provided and diving authorizations are issued. The Marine Reserve also has a surveillance and maintenance service team that carries out these functions on a daily basis. The regulation of both the traditional fishing exploitation and the leisure activities involves a control and surveillance service that guarantees the correct use and preservation of the Marine Reserve. The reserve has served to repopulate the surrounding areas and especially the nearby seabeds. It is now possible to enjoy a variety and quantity of forms of life to the delight of even the most demanding. Marine reserves are the answer to a need and the expression of a commitment to the future. Aimed at protecting and preserving our submerged wealth is traditional exploitation and the conservation of our coastline, for our enjoyment and for the enjoyment of future generations.